Before we begin, I'd like to say a few words of thanks to the many individuals who have been part of bringing this evening together. First, I want to recognize the Gill family, especially Kate Gill, who is joining us this evening. The Prospect Park Alliance team for hosting us, including Christian Zimmerman and Sue Donahue. We're delighted to be here at the Concert Grove Pavilion, which has been so masterfully restored in the recent years. The Young People's Chorus of New York City, who will grace us with a performance a little bit later this evening, led by founder and artistic director Francisco Nunez. The board of MAS, Yoli Tang, who's with us this evening, and all of the rest of the board who supports our work every day. And our extraordinary MAS team, events team, Iana Angelo and Genevieve Wagner, who worked so hard to coordinate making this event possible. And of course, it wouldn't be appropriate to have an evening about the Brennan Gill without recognizing Phyllis Cohen, our longtime director of public art, who stewarded this award from its inception through last year. Brilliant, creative, deeply compassionate, she shares much in common with tonight's honoree, as well as the award's namesake. We are grateful for her continued service to the organization. And a special shout out to everybody in MAS, all the MAS staff who are here helping tonight, and even those who are not with us tonight, for keeping the organization humming along through the last 18 months of the world's challenges. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank all of you for coming to celebrate with us. Tonight is a special occasion for MAS, and not just for the incredible art we're here to talk about and to honor, but also because it's our very first in-person public event since February 2020, more than 18 months ago. Then I could never have imagined getting up in front of a microphone and worrying about whether or not I had mask marks on my face. And although we had to wait longer than we expected to present this extremely worthy award, it struck me that in so many ways, the events of the last 2 weeks speak deeply to the themes that make tonight's honoree such a meaningful selection for the Gill Prize. Already this month, we've experienced Hurricane Ida, a powerful reminder that there is no excuse in this day and age for a built environment that fails to protect the people who live, work, and play within it. We celebrated Labor Day, reflecting on the everyday heroes who fought and still fight to secure basic rights for workers here and around the world. And of course, this weekend, we mark the 20th anniversary of September 11th, 2001, which, much like March 25th, 1911, represents a moment in which the city's sorrow was so great that its impact could be felt across the nation. In moments like these, both the solemn and the celebratory, we are reminded of the continued importance of art to human life. Great art unites us, binding past to present and inspiring us to imagine the future we can build. Tonight in particular, after a year plus we've all had, I am reminded of the ways that performance art in particular brings us all together, and how meaningful and essential that togetherness is to the vigor and verve of New York City. So I'm delighted to be with you tonight. Thank you all for coming. And now it is my enormous honor to introduce our next speaker, the chair of the Brennan Gill Prize jury, John Hayworth. John has been a leader and a mentor in the arts and cultural sector for decades. Most recently, he served as the senior executive and director of the National Museum of American Indian here in New York. He has also served as the assistant commissioner for cultural institutions at the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and taught for 14 years at NYU Steinhardt. Thoroughly immersed in the arts of our city, John may consume more theater, more opera, more ballet, more music, and more literature than any other person in New York. He is truly our in-house cultural guru, Please help me welcome John Hayworth.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, thank you so much. I'm really so honored to be here, and thank you, Elizabeth, for all the hard work that you do every day. My honor to be here for the Brennan Gill Prize tonight. I want to begin by saying just a few words about the man who inspired this auspicious prize, the longtime New Yorker magazine theater and architecture critic, the author, the former MAS president, and the champion preservationist Brennan Gill was a man of extraordinary intelligence and a sharp humor. His friend and successor at the New Yorker, the critic Paul Goldberger, and of the Brennan Gill, said of Brennan Gill, he wrote what he believed with equal parts of love and courage. He graced MAS and New York City with his remarkable talents as a writer and activist, most until his death in 1998. The Brennan Gill Prize itself was established in 1987 by the friend and his fellow MAS board member, Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, along with MAS board members Helen Tucker and Margot Wellington. This prize is awarded annually to the creator of a specific work that captures the energy, the vitality, the vision, and the verb of New York City. It celebrates these exceptional contributions in the life of our city and promises New York as a source of inspiration to the artists who have lived and worked here. I would like to thank the members of the Brennan Gill Prize jury who are here tonight, joining me in this task of selecting tonight's honoree in the early weeks of the year 2020. Randy Borscheit, Gail Gregg, Laurie Beckelman, Pat Cruz, and Kasim Shepard. Will you join me in a round of applause for all of them? Thank you. We gathered together for these jury deliberations for many years, and one of the hardest parts of this task is weighing the works of art and the different expressions against one another, looking at books, at musical compositions, plays, works of choreography, painting, sculpture, film, and all else. Even essays are eligible for this prize, and there are many nominations that we wade through. The jury conversations, honestly, are some of the most inspiring and stirring, thought-provoking conversations that I have had in my life. And in some cases, we can't help but confer special recognition beyond the prize itself. During the deliberations for the 2020 Gill Prize, the jury was struck by the quality of 4 books in particular that draw up on the historic record of our city in quite special and particular ways. And we are very proud tonight to honor 4 writers, all of whom were finalists for the prize, with special designation. And so they are Gabrielle Brindiner Vianney for Contested City, Art and Public History as a Mediation of New York's Stewart Park Urban Renewal Area, Thomas J. Campanelli for Brooklyn, the City and the Future City, Stanley Greenberg for Codex New York, Typologies of the City, and Eric K. Washington, The Boss of the Grips, The Life of James H. Williams, and The Red Caps of Grand Central Station. And believe me, all 4 of these books are so worthy of this recognition that the city and MAS is giving them. I would like to acknowledge all of them. And yes. Terrific. Great. We'll get, and there's Stanley on the second row, right. Congratulations to all 4 for this fine work. Now I'm delighted to introduce our 2020 Brennan Gill Prize winner, and to honor, looking forward for more than a year and a half, for honoring Julia Wolfe. Julia Wolfe is a 2020 Brennan Gill Prize winner, and to honor, looking forward for more than a year and a half, for honoring Julia Wolfe. Julia Wolfe is a 2020 Brennan Gill Prize winner, and to honor, looking forward for more than a year and a half, for honoring Julia Wolfe. The conception of this incredible piece, this large multimedia piece of music, was presented at the Geffen Hall in early 2019, in January 24th to 26th, 2019. It conveys the story of a history of New York that's worth our attention. The Grammy-nominated work is the third in a series of incredible works by this year's honoree, which focuses on the legacy of John Henry and the 2015 Anthracite Fields, a concert work that was about the Pennsylvania coal miners, which won the Pulitzer Prize, and on and on. I'm delighted to also report to you that Julia will have work this season at Carnegie Hall and other prominent places around our city. Fires in My Mouth was commissioned and performed by the New York Philharmonic under the baton of Maestro Van Zwielen and the chamber choir, the Crossing and the Young People's Chorus of New York City, which mines the emotional tragedy which has such contemporary relevance. Near the end of the workday on March 25th, 1911, fire was sparked, and we know in the Shirtwaist Factory at 23 Washington Place, with the doors locked, the response that prevented the employees from leaving and they were overloaded with scraps of clothing, acting as kindling, and trying to deal with that tragic situation. This is a story about immigrants, about labor, about an event in the city that was changing the conversation about all these various issues of labor and politics. The tragedy shocked the entire country. It galvanized support for labor reforms and all the rest that is embodied in this history. This oratorio illuminates what a piece of orchestral work can be to shine light on issues and also bring something of beauty and relevance and significance to all of us who listen to the work and take it in. So it's with that I'm so proud to introduce this year's 2020 Brennan Gill Prize winner, Julia Wolfe. Good to see you. Good to see you. Right, so this is for you. Great. Okay, yes. And now I'll ask Julia to say some words. Yeah, thank you.
I'm a little shorter. Pull it down. I wrote a few things down so I wouldn't space out too much. First, thanks so much to the Municipal Art Society for honoring Fire in My Mouth and the memory of the women and men who fought for better working conditions before and after the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. So Fire in My Mouth brought together an amazing group of artists, the New York Philharmonic, Jaap van Zweden, the music director, conductor, Deborah Borda, the executive director, commissioners Linda and Stuart Nelson, the Crossing, the choir from Philadelphia under the direction of Donald Nally, the Young People's Chorus under the direction of Francisco Nunez, who you will hear later in the program. My artistic collaborators, producer Kenny Savelson, who's here tonight, director Annie Kaufman, scenic projection designer Jeff Sugg, costume designer Marion Talon Del Rosa, and sound designer Mark Gray. These things don't happen by a singular person. I'm sure you all realize when you're in the hall and you see the bells and whistles that go along with a piece like this. So they're the dream team, and I'm so grateful for them. And just to say briefly that I'm especially honored to receive this from the Municipal Art Society, which is an organization I deeply admire. They're an organization that's been celebrating, protecting, and advocating for a beautiful and livable city for all for 125 years. So pretty remarkable and an honor for me. So thank you.
one of the great pleasures of this event is having a further conversation, and two of our jury members, Patricia Cruz, who's the artistic director and CEO of Harlem Stage, and Kasim Shepard, who's a filmmaker and writer and adjunct assistant professor at Columbia University, will now join Julia in conversation. So please come up.
How's everyone doing tonight? Such a beautiful, glorious evening. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you, Julia, for sharing your work with us.
It's great to be with the two of you. Am I on? Maybe I am. Okay.
So do we start? It's hard for me to begin this conversation without acknowledging our blessings. The world has been in such turmoil, and so many of the themes that are in your work and represented in your work represent the themes, not the themes, but the issues with which we have to deal now on a daily basis, whether we're talking about fire or floods, loss of life, pandemics, all of those things for me, while we're witnessing history as it is being made, there's something about art and how artists reflect on our circumstances in such a way that touches not only our brains, but our hearts and our souls. And I want to thank you for the incredible work that you've done with this piece and with your other works that look at who we have been, who we are now, and what are the correctives. Because my position is always, what can we do as human beings, as artists, as activists, to change and make the world a better place? And I think that art is critical to that. So, Julia, I want to turn to you and ask, my curiosity about art is, I was a terrible student. I do love to read history now, but that's a kind of late learned passion. But I've always learned more about history and life through the lens of an artist. So I want to ask you, my dear, how did you come to do this piece? What is the origin story, as Kasim has said? What is the intent? How do you arrive at a title? How do you arrive at your structure? That's one question. So I will let you take that, and then we'll continue. Okay.
Well, I love the question of why, because that's always the answer is always interesting, especially in music, because music is, for the most part, we think of music as beyond words, and expressing something very, very deep and human. But in this case, there are words, and what are those words, and why did I come to look at this subject? On just a very practical, basic level, I've walked by the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire building for years. I teach at NYU and in a building on West 4th Street, and this building is literally around the corner. So for years, I just would walk by and see this little plaque on the building. There's going to be a beautiful new kind of architectural memorial that will be more visible. But this little plaque that says 146 people perished at this site. And so some of it's proximity, that I've just walked by this site. Maybe that was meant to be. And then at the same time, I was creating, as Pat mentioned, a lot of work that focused on subjects about the American workers. The first two pieces were a little guy-heavy, so I was particularly drawn to this story because the majority of people working in this particular factory, and a lot of people working in the garment industry, were women, and they were young women, mostly young immigrant women. So all of these things together, that I was already becoming a history hack or a researcher of the sort, and then just seeing that site as well. I guess that's the beginning of it, was walking by a building and knowing what happened there.
And I think that it's so interesting because it also speaks to the extent to which these histories are are imminent within our built environment, which is something that's very important to the Municipal Art Society, but also so embedded in our daily experience just as citizens of the city. But so what happens then? I wonder, could you tell us a little bit about your research process? I mean, it's such an important story that catalyzed so much in terms of the formation of the ILGW, the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, and so much else in the labor movement. Everything from fire escapes to all kinds of different things that we then became regulated after this horrible tragedy. But how did you go about researching the experience of the women who worked in the factory, and how did that inform your process as a composer?
Well, everything is fair game as a resource. This was very different from the piece that I worked on just before. So the piece, maybe I should just back up a little bit. The piece just before this was Anthracite Fields. And in that case, I looked at this coal mining region just north of where I grew up in Pennsylvania. There were people to talk to, retired miners. That industry ended like around 1960s. And so I could actually talk to people who lived that life. In this case, at this point, there are no living witnesses or survivors. Of course, we lost 146 workers, but then there were many people who got out or didn't go to work that day. And none of them are still living. So I couldn't talk to anybody, which was a little bit sad. I would have liked to, although not everyone would want to talk about that day. It was, on one hand, you lost lives, and on the other hand, you lost spirits. So even people who survived were very damaged by this experience. So talking to them might have been complicated. But so many great books written about it. This goes to Pat's issue of why write a piece of music about this, because it's very well documented from the earliest. Right now, of course, I'm spacing out on every book I've read about it, but a lot of reading by historians and witnesses, newspaper articles, labor laws, oral histories. So I really dug into both reading and listening to oral histories. At Yivo was one location. There's an Italian, in Little Italy, a small museum that commemorates this event as well. Gosh, where else? Documentaries. I'm kind of a carnivore, so I just search and read until I start to get a picture of what needs to be addressed in the piece.
And so, I mean, did you want the voices of these women to come alive through this as a because it feels very rooted in the experience of the women and the language and the ways you chose certain texts. I wonder if you could speak a little bit about how you got from this research process, this omnivorous research process as you described, to then figuring out how to represent the experience of the women on stage.
Yeah, I felt really strongly about not making a piece about victims. Of course, they are victims of negligence in a very real sense, but it was an amazing population. So you're talking about these young immigrant women for the most part. There were men working as well, but majority young immigrant women. Who were these women? They just got here off the boat. That's the first movement, immigration. They didn't speak the language. They were self-educated, coming primarily, almost exclusively, actually, from two different communities. So one community is Eastern European and Russian Jews. The other community is Southern Italians. Both were escaping tragic situations in Eastern Europe and Russia, escaping persecution, and in Southern Italy, escaping famine. And I believe it's like a volcano had erupted, and anyway, life was disrupted. So they've come here, and then they take this leadership role where they're outspoken and they're protesting. And they realize that things aren't as they should be. But they really were fearless. And that was a real eye-opener for me because, of course, we always think of women, today was, women leaders and this kind of powerful new woman. But actually, 1911, they were unbelievable. And that was very inspiring to see at this early stage that they could harness that energy. So while there is this tragedy that is in this oratorio, the last movement, the whole opening is about immigration and then them taking responsibility and taking power into their own hands.
Thank you for that. And thank you for the helicopter that's now circling us. We can pretend we're also out at the U.S. Open. I think that one of the things that's so incredible about what you've done is the structure of the piece. To look at immigration, to look at factory, which I read as work, to look at tragedy, and then to look at protest, and how all of those things are linked. And it has such resonance for right now. When we look at issues of immigration and what a dilemma it plays in this society as we try so desperately to hold on to this illusory American dream. And I have real problems with that. And I know that as we look at immigration and as we fear it, as we try to control it, we get further and further into a very deep and bad hole. And I just want you to talk about how you've arrived at the structure, taking each of those elements and weaving it together in a work of this sort. Thank you for your work on that.
Structure is always a really interesting thing in music. It gets a little easier in a way if you have a subject. I'm always sketching out plans and patterns even when it's purely music and there is no text. But text is your friend because it guides you and it's very text-based. That even the rhythm of the words, even the rhythm of the language is driving the piece. So, but in a way, I just started at the beginning, so which made it easy. This does have a beginning, and it begins with people coming across the ocean. So the first movement is immigration. The text is, it was very beautiful. I always find these things as sort of little gifts from God or something. These suddenly you happen upon a text and you go, oh, wow, look at that. So I was in an oral history archive, and there was Molly Wexler saying, without passports or anything, I took a boat, a big, beautiful boat. Must have been beautiful to her, this huge boat. And anyway, I don't know, the text is probably in your program. But she's coming across, it seemed like with 5 sisters or 5 cousins or something, 5 of us girls. And that's where it starts. So I just started where it starts. And then pretty much off the boat, they wound up in these factories. So that's come second, so it just went right into the factory. So the second movement is factory. And one thing that I have a lot of fun with is emulating the sound of a factory. Some of that is literal. There are these big, beautiful scissors in the piece, which Annie Coffin, who's here, wonderfully had the singers hold up high, and you could see them. They're these beautiful scissors. I do love scissors. There was a scissor search to find the scissors. That's a very literal sound, but then you can make the orchestra sound like a room full of sewing machines. How do I do that? First of all, there's no recording, so we don't know what that sounded like. This was probably the beginning of Edison experiments, I guess, but we didn't have a tape recorder back then, so they're just descriptions. So I would read, you'd enter the factory floor and there'd be the roar of 200 sewing machines. Well, what does that sound like? You know how today you want to buy an appliance and you said, can I get the quietest air conditioner or the quietest dishwasher? Well, I don't think that was an option. It's that they were just noisy sewing machines. And so there are all these beautiful ways that instruments can emulate that. I found this crazy string technique where you take a bow and if you put a lot of pressure, you mute the left hand so you don't get pitch, and you put a lot of pressure on the bow and it kind of goes like this. It's really crazy. So the entire string orchestra goes like this. And so you put that together with the percussionists, they're rolling on the rims of the drums. So usually, you hear the skin of the drum, right? Which we heard very nicely earlier. There's some nice drumming going on. But if you roll on the rims, it's like clickety-clackety, it's just a clickety-clackety sound. So all together, these are sort of evoke this idea of the sewing machines. And, we played with other sounds, the brass instruments blowing air through their instruments. So like, I don't know what that is, but it sounds like a machine to me. So there's a lot of liberty because this isn't like a documentary or a literal history. It's a poetic history. So just lots of fun playing with sounds. And so just to give you an idea, that's Factory. I don't know. I think maybe we do have an excerpt from Factory on that list there. If the sound group. I should say also that what you'd hear in this movement are folk songs of the two populations that worked in the factory. So you have a Yiddish song that's about I'm very proud I sew with the needle, just an old traditional tune. There's this factory, and then the Italian song comes in. That's just a little snippet. It was our two different parts. One was from the opening, the noisy part, and then it was really fun to make a duet between these two songs that don't know each other, but met on stage, so to speak. They were on antiphonal, so the Yiddish song is on one side of the stage, and the Sicilian pizzicato song is on the other side of the stage, staged by Annie Kaufman. So it was just a really fun way to do it. So you can move from immigration to the factory to protest, which of course is, in a way, the crux of the piece. That these women, took this into their hands and spoke out. And then it ends with fire. It didn't have to go in that order, because I guess I started in the natural order. Immigration, factory, protests came before the fire and came after the fire. But the fire was the hardest thing to set, because how do you set something like that? It's horrific. I think it was something like 18 seconds that this fire blew up and everyone was gone. And so you don't want to sentimentalize it. You don't want to dramatize it because it lessens it. So what the heck do you do with that subject? And there were very gruesome photographs. You can online, you can see. And I said to Jeff Sugg, who was an amazing artist, a projection designer, I don't want any bodies. It's just, we had a wonderful collaborative relationship working on this. And I just said, let's pick other imagery. So he has these fantastic images of burnt fire escapes that something happened there. But somehow, out of respect for the bodies, I just felt like we weren't going there. So what do I do? So I just really made it music in a way. It's like there's a tiny bit of text where the singers are just saying, "I see them falling." It's just floating on top of this bombastic orchestra. And that was hard to figure out how to do it, and not go too far or something. So anyway, sorry, Pat, that was a long answer. That's the structure, and I think I just saved that fire till the end, because
It's amazing hearing you talk not only about the way in which you've created sounds that evoke some of the experience of the place in terms of the machinery, but also the voices and the language and these different languages coming into encounter, which again speaks to the nature of collaboration and organizing that this really fostered and fomented. But speaking of collaborators, I would love to have a special guest join our conversation now. Francisco Nunez is the founder and artistic director of the Young People's Chorus of New York City, an incredible group of singers that will be treating us to a performance in just a few minutes. And we can hear, Francisco, can you come join us, please? Awesome. And Francisco can tell us a little bit more about the Young People's Chorus, but as I understand it, the mission is to provide children of all cultural and economic backgrounds with a unique program of music education and choral performance that seeks to fulfill each child's potential while creating a model of artistic excellence and diversity that enriches the community. Francisco, how did YPC come to be involved in this project?
Good evening, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with you, Julia. Congratulations, and congratulations to everybody at MAS. So Julia and YPC has had a long history. We met through Michael Gordon, who was our artistic composer in residence, and he was writing a lot of music for us. In fact, we're going to hear one of his pieces. But not only is YPC going to sing tonight, by the way, Kasim, everybody here is going to actually sing tonight. I just want to prepare you for that. So he was writing for us. He became our composer in residence, and I was asking Julia to write a piece for us, and she never would. She would say yes, but then she was busy, but I know why. She was writing this incredible piece, Fire in My Mouth, and she did call and asked us if we will participate. And the idea of having 146 singers representing the 146 souls that were lost was something, and then as she described it to us, what we were going to do, I felt compelled, not only to sing it, but to use it as an educational component to teach our young people about this great city and what we all do. I went to NYU as well, so I've always seen that. I never knew what it was. So she opened up my heart to knowing such a great tragedy happened in New York City.
And of course, I mean, a lot of the people who worked in the fire, the victims and the survivors, many of them were quite young, right? I mean, we're talking about 14-year-olds in many cases. So the idea of bringing youth into this chorus of voices seems especially appropriate and meaningful and poignant. And I mean, for both of you guys, we're in a moment right now with the pandemic where these questions of essential work and what is work are really at the fore. Pat was talking about the resonance of these themes today. So, yeah, I mean, what would you say going forward, both with your educational mission and with the sort of historical reach, all of your work in the trilogy, thinking about different kinds of work and different kinds of labor? What do you think are the important lessons of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory that need to be a part of our general understanding of urban experience in New York and beyond right now? What is the relevance of this historic tragedy today?
Well, first I'd say that even though I teach, I'm not an academic, so these things aren't really academic to me. They're real. They happened in 1911. But the reason I'm interested in them because there's a resonance, as Pat's referring to. There's a resonance today. Sadly, I think all these union workers that when this is really the beginning of unions are rolling over in their graves as people are rejecting the idea of a collective voice. So the most essential thing is that people have a collective voice and they have a say and they have some protection. And so many things got put into place. So there has been some improvement. All the fire code put into place, right? If you wonder why the heck do I need a window or, the staircase or whatever, well, it all came right after this fire. Pretty much the same as right after the fire. So anyway, unfortunately, we don't always learn all of our lessons you'd think we get smarter and smarter, but it's questionable. And so for me, the resonance is that we're still dealing with similar kinds of issues today.
It's interesting because my mother came here in the 1950s from the Dominican Republic, and she worked in factories her whole life. And my father came in the 1920s from Haiti, and he also worked in factories. My father was a furrier, and my mother made hats. So there was a real connection for me. I'm the son of an immigrant whose parents were in these factories my whole life. And here I am today, sitting with you all. That's the greatness of America. I think what the story is it's about us, where we come from, and how if you give us a chance and you make it safe, we can make a great society together. And I think that these young people who are here are seeing that. And that's what I think your music represents for me anyway.
Thank you so much. Well, we'd like to congratulate both of you and all of the collaborators who aren't here on the stage, but it definitely is a collective experience, both the experience that you're representing on stage and evoking, but also the creation of it and the bringing it into these kinds of fora where we can hear them, whether we're at the Philharmonic or here in this beautiful public space. So congratulations to you guys and all the collaborators on this project for this recognition, for a work that celebrates the spirit of New York City as inextricable from immigration, from labor, from protest. And Francisco, we're so looking forward to the Young People's Chorus, who will now share some of their music with us. So if you want to invite them on stage, we will clear the way. And I guess we're all going to be singing, guys, so get ready.
Thank you.
Thank you.